My name is Annette Mills. I am a faculty member at the University of Canterbury and a convener of the Children's Working Group for the Privacy Foundation of New Zealand. And my co-presenter will introduce herself.
Kia ora koutou, ko Rebecca toku ingoa. I am a member of the Privacy Foundation of New Zealand on the committee there and part of our Children's Privacy Working Group. Thanks so much for everyone being here today.
Thank you, everyone. So welcome to our webinar From Playtime to Profiling. So in this session, Rebecca and I will be talking about the rise of biometric AI, because we can't talk about biometrics without talking about AI, in children's digital lives and their experiences. We'll introduce some examples around how facial recognition, voice analysis is being used. How they're being used in games, applications, toys, and the privacy risks that some of these technologies pose, and some of the concerns around biometric profiling. We will then close with some practical steps for parents and others, like schools, to ensure that children's biometric data is handled responsibly and ethically to protect their digital rights. So our basic program, we'll first talk about a bit about the foundation and who we are, and then we'll take a deep dive into the topic itself. So we are an advocate group, the Privacy Foundation of New Zealand. Who are we? We are an advocacy group for the protection of the privacy rights of New Zealanders by providing independent, informed, and public comment on privacy. You can go and have a look at our website. We often engage in many of the consultations that will come from the government, from the Office of the Privacy Commission. We are involved when we have an opportunity to. We are always looking for opportunities to be able to have input on various legislation. So we've been involved in things like the Children's Privacy Project. We've also contributed to the Biometric Code and many other activities. So Rebecca and I are also a part of a working group. There are a number of working groups, and we are part of the Children's Privacy Working Group. So we focus very much on the privacy rights of tamariki and rangatahi. In this particular webinar, we are focusing on younger children. So we are primarily focusing on children's rights around tamariki. So our seminar, From Playtime to Profiling. So in today's digital world, advances in biometric technologies such as facial recognition, voice analysis, and AI-driven behavior tracking means that these are and will be increasingly integrated into toys, games, educational software, social media platforms that children use every day. Biometric technologies offer a number of benefits: convenience, personalization, potential for age verification. For example, the social media ban is what comes to mind, and security. But they also come with increasing concerns and risks, including issues around transparency. Do we know what data is being collected? How is it being used? Meaningful consent. Function creep, is information being used in ways that we did not expect? And of course, biases also comes up. But first, let's talk about a few of the key concepts. So what is a digital profile? So a digital profile basically comprises all the data or information that has been collected about a person, which is held online or in some sort of electronic form. In many cases, the different sources do not talk to each other, so each has only a snippet of a person's total profile. For example, you can think of what your bank knows about you versus what your employer knows about you. But as technology comes together, we are able to build more and more complete pictures of individuals. For example, including posts on social media, photos uploaded to Facebook. When we think of children, that information is going to include all online information, images, and interactions that shape their digital identity. So that means including the toys and so on that children play with. This includes information shared on social media, websites, and with any sort of online platform. So it's important to understand that a child's digital profile can be contributed by to by their own activities, by themselves, by their parents, and by others. and it can have lasting consequences and impacts on a child's life. However, for children, most of this profile is built by others, and the more we have online is the less autonomy they're going to have in the future for creating their own person. So biometrics, what are biometrics? Biometrics is no exception. It is also a type of personal information that is collected. So biometrics measures things like unique physical and behavioral characteristics. So when we think of biometrics, we often think of things like a fingerprint, maybe facial recognition, iris recognition, or voice. But the way in which we walk, the way in which we type are also considered to be biometric measures. It also includes how we behave, how we engage with social media, and how we express emotions. So for children, all of this would be a contributor to their digital profile, to their digital profile. Let's think about some of these characteristics. For example, some of them we know are, we say that they're unchangeable. What about fingerprints? This is a good one. So are your fingerprints the same from birth? The simple answer is yes. A person's fingerprints usually form in the 17th to 19th week of pregnancy. These prints are set in stone, so even before we're born. As a person grows, the prints get bigger while retaining the same pattern. So essentially, the prints just simply scale up gradually. So it's virtually impossible to change or erase your fingerprints. However, they can be impacted by a number of factors. For example, the jobs you do, maybe illnesses such as cancer, cuts, burns, and even old age may actually change a bit of it. But apart from that, we can consider them to be unchangeable. So many physical biometrics, such as fingerprints, your voice, are unchangeable. But what about other kinds of biometrics? Very often we don't think of those behavioral profiles. For example, how do we interact with each other? How do we express emotions? All of these become a part of this profile. And it becomes, and even though this may change as a child grows and develops, we have to ask this question: what if all of what they have done is a part of their profile, of their dossier that is forever recorded as one goes through life? Think back to your own childhood. What would your profile look like today if all of this was recorded in the same way that we're capturing so much information about our children today? Today's children are growing up in a world that is increasingly open. It's almost like a glass house, with many of their movements, every thought or not, being captured or surmised. But because we don't see it all the time, because we don't have that little urchin on our shoulder that's following us around, which most of us would consider to be rather creepy, we actually don't think about it. Yet privacy is very important and it's part of being able to develop who we are. So, how is this dossier being built for children? Let's look at some of the ways, the current and new ways in which children can now and will interact online, and then ask ourselves these questions. How is this profile being built? We have toys that they play with. Think back to your own childhood. We'd play games and we would resonate the personality of the toy. We'd have conversations. But now all of those conversations are being captured by the very toys that children may be playing with. Digital wallets to teach money skills. There's so many fantastic technologies out there. And I had a great time searching for some of these. But then we have to ask, is it only about teaching skills? These are the good things, but what else is being captured? Wallets for age verification. In New Zealand and in Australia, we're calling for social media bans for children under the age of 16. So we must have a way of being able to verify the age of an individual. But even that means sharing information with the provider. Even some of those unintended photographs. I've included the UK Commissioner's call to ban nudify AI applications. Even the unintended photos and sometimes the ones that others make can become a part of one's profile. Hence, we have this concerted effort to take these down. So we need to also ask, we need to know, and we need to have a say. What information is being collected? How is this being used or could be used? What about uses I didn't expect? Consider the fines that Microsoft and Amazon are having to pay, and these are only the ones that we know about, for collecting and using kids' data without consent and likely in ways that are not expected. And what are the impacts? We don't know. Does your child only get shown certain content? We call that personalization, or should we call it discrimination? To be honest, we really don't know. This is not about scaremongering, it's about creating awareness. What can parents do? Here's a new technology. This was notified probably about a few weeks ago. Just have a note of the snippet. So Google is now allowing children under the age of 18 to access Gemini using parental supervised accounts. What reassurances are Google offering to parents? The most important one is that it won't use children's data to train its AI models. There are also content filters in place, though Google admits these are not foolproof. Parents can set time limits, restrict certain apps, and block questionable content. But here's the twist: kids can still activate Gemini AI themselves. And what's really rubbed parents the wrong way was the fact that Gemini is opt in and is opt out, not opt in. Can you imagine saying no to your child? You're taking the new toy away without being asked in the first place, is it okay for my child to have this? Google has already made that decision. Then there are other questions to ask. For example, when should kids start using these kinds of tools? How much is too much? And who decides when it's time to stop? These might well be the questions that modern parents, are going to have to address, and they don't come with chatbot friendly answers. But as we said, it's not all gloom. There are many opportunities and many benefits for children. With the increasing power and prevalence of AI, it's easy to see how AI can potentially offer children various benefits. For example, personalized learning. It can help to explain difficult concepts. We can tailor systems to so that so that educational technology is able to better adapt to children's specific needs. Toys, games can provide early detection of developmental issues and help us to respond. Provide mental and emotional support, make play and learning a lot more fun. We can enhance accessibility, particularly sometimes for some children who would benefit from new and different ways to interact with systems to learn. Healthcare and safeguarding children. For example, facial age verification to deal with things like social media, fingerprinting from very young ages. Many countries are finding this very useful for being able to identify or reconnect lost children. So there are a number of benefits, and we probably know what many of these are. But then there are also the concerns and the risks. Transparency. I've mentioned some of these already, and Rebecca will talk a bit more about this. What is my child's data being used for? How will this impact them in the future? We all want things to be positive, but are there any negatives? And what can I, as a school or as a parent, do about it? For example, given the human-like tone of chatbots, where the line between animate and the inanimate blurs, what are the impacts? What will be the impacts on children's development and privacy when they interact with those systems? Research already indicates that these influence children's perceptions of intelligence, their cognitive development, and their social behavior, especially during different developmental stages, and think especially of young children. These systems can change or modify children's behaviors and worldviews, whether intentional or not. Google, of course, suggests a few best practices when interacting with its own tool, Gemini AI, such as reminding children that Gemini is not a person, teaching them how to verify information, and encouraging them not to share personal details. But who's really in charge? Unfortunately, the uncomfortable reality is that much of the responsibility has shifted to parents and has shifted to schools. Even assuming generously that the technologies have a net positive value for children's development, there are still a lot of unanswered questions that we need to ask. I've also mentioned here the power school breach because a lot of data is being collected. Now, this breach involved 62.4 million children across the USA, Canada, and other countries. And although the exact nature of the information that was breached varied depending on the district or the country, some of this included medical data. And think of a lot of mental and wellness data that is being collected by schools. Much of this falls outside the realms of Health Information Acts. So, for example, sorry, one second. Yeah. So, for example, here's a popular tool that is being used by schools today. So, this particular one, line-wise, um, but it allows biometric technology to be easily integrated. And the line-wise package allows children to essentially check in on a weekly basis in terms of how well are they doing. So it's a weekly check-in. It's a little bit difficult to tell with some of these stats. This was taken from the New Zealand website, and it's very clear that a lot of children are being helped. But there are 5.5 million pieces of data that are being collected about children from these weekly check-ins. We don't know how many are involved based on this snippet, but clearly there's a lot. And we have to ask ourselves, is its use necessary? Is it proportional? One of the issues is that we in New Zealand and in Australia, we lag behind a lot of other countries in understanding the short and long-term repercussions of biometric technologies in schools today. So I'm going to hand over now to Rebecca, who is going to talk more about these technologies.
Just get my slides sorted out. Oh, kia ora. Thank you, Annette. So I wanted to start out by looking at an example of a biometric toy and consider some of the privacy points arising with this. So meet Royby. It won a Smart Toy Award a few years back. The awards are held in collaboration with the World Economic Forum, and it's a non-commercial initiative. The competition used 4 design and assessment guidelines to evaluate applicants and then select winners. And so the criteria and the assessments were looking at data privacy and security, accessibility, use of AI and transparency, age appropriateness, and healthy play. And all the companies that win an award are required to post an AI ethics statement or governance statement on their website. Royby is a virtual learning assistant, and it's designed to help tamariki between the age of 2 and 8 learn technology, math, science, and languages, say like French and English. It's got voice recognition and a camera for facial recognition. Royby state that this is for facial and emotion detection so that Royby can say hello and can see and talk to your child. So it's pretty cool, and it's a powerful tool to help learning. It's got age-appropriate content, and it's engaging and dynamic. But as you look into it, I think there are arguably some opportunities to better explain things from a privacy perspective. And so I checked out the privacy statement online. For starters, that's just over 5,000 words, so probably about, say, 20 minutes read time to get through. It is a positive within the statement that it emphasises right up front that for use in schools, parental consent needs to be obtained before allowing students to use the service. And then throughout the privacy statement, there are also clear references or comments made that information will not be used or sold for marketing purposes. The usual privacy details that you'd expect are covered within the statement, and so it's got sections on collection and use of information by Royby. The problem is that none of it is very specific, and there are many statements that the company, quote, may do something with you or your child's information, but nothing particularly concrete when I suspect it probably most likely always is used or shared in that way. The policy does make it clear that Amazon Web Services are used, but then there's only reference to, quote, similar organizations. And so it's unclear which third-party companies and service providers Roybe, the company, works with. So I think definitely an area there of improvement within the privacy policy in terms of understanding who data is shared with. And where I said before that as part of the awards, there needs to be an AI ethics statement provided. There is within the privacy policy for Roybe an AI ethics policy, and it states, and I'll read it out, when developing technology products and services, including those using AI and machine learning, our organisation adheres to the principles of human dignity, non-discrimination, fair treatment, health and safety, good governance, fair labour practice, fair competition, environmental protection, animal welfare, business integrity, ethical business, anti-corruption, social responsibility, economic sustainability, and the rule of law. So, of course, this is all really good stuff, but it doesn't actually tell you too much specific in terms of AI ethics. And I think probably the biggest gap for me was understanding where information is kept, by who, and for how long. I don't really have a sense of where children's voice recordings are stored. I think that might be with Roybe in the US. And the privacy statement does say when you terminate your account, steps will be taken to delete any personal information from Roybe's database within 90 days. But from a data jurisdiction and retention point of view, there's quite a bit more to unpack here. I mean, none of this is to say that Roybe isn't meeting the right privacy standards and laws. It's just, I think that it would be good to see more to address transparency. Certainly, if we were US consumers and looking at buying Roybe, the information that Roybe has is seen as sensitive, and it falls within the definition of educational and pupil records in California. So the clearer the information that can be provided up front, the better. And so, you kind of go, I think, why worry? We're just talking about a toy here. And in part, toys can collect a lot of data and information, and often so much more than what we expect. And I often say, it's obvious companies need to collect information in order for the toy to function or for the actual service to be provided. But there's quite a difference between information that's necessary for the toy to operate and other data points that are collected more generally. And the tables that I've got up here are from a 2016 report from the US Committee on Commerce, Science and Transport. And it outlines the types of information collected from toy makers that the committee particularly surveyed at that time. Now, again, bearing in mind this was back in 2016, so you can imagine what this collection is like now, almost 10 years on. And it means that you really can know a lot about a child and their whānau. Moving on to talk a little bit about biometrics in schools. There's a range of uses for biometrics, and understandably schools in Kura will see a number of potential benefits. I think we're probably quite different to other countries that have got products that address a range of purposes, say around security, attendance tracking, meal payments, library borrowing, verifying student identities. But these uses are out there, and as I say, you can acknowledge and understand how we might want to adopt them here in Aotearoa. So I think it's good just to kind of, from a readiness perspective, have a think about what is the potential in this space. And certainly do let us know here at the Privacy Foundation of any biometric tools or systems used in education settings. We'd love to hear more about these and better understand what's out there. And so I put up some of the potential uses there. And just touching upon that last one, certainly biometrics provides a higher or arguably higher level of security than passwords or PINs. You're reducing the risk of unauthorized access. And ID cards and passwords, as we all know, can be readily lost or shared. And adults are using biometrics like this every day when we think about it with our banking apps or if you've got Windows Hello. So again, you can see the potential benefit there. And thinking about the meal payment option or use in cafeterias, there certainly might be a faster wait in line times. But I came across an interesting comment online that was looking at some of these systems. And the point was made that actually this could help protect privacy because it means that everyone is treated the same. And the chance of being identified of being on a certain payment type would be avoided, which I thought was interesting. And so as I thought some more about these uses, I was struck by a little bit, potential uses. I was thinking, gosh, some of these feel quite futuristic. And when I came across this headline, though, I thought, maybe it's a bit more like Back to the Future. This article was from 2012, and it's talking about the development of an engagement pedometer. And one of the intentions of its design was to identify what topics in the classroom might interest and engage students. And so the idea was that the pedometer sends a small current across the skin and measures changes in electrical charges as the sympathetic nervous system responds to stimuli. And the BBC also produced a short video considering the application and potential benefits, saying in particular, this could be quite powerful and useful for those who are autistic when it's got the ability, say, to read feelings where people can't necessarily have the words to communicate emotion. I'm not sure exactly how that particular product fared, but the same company who brought it out also does have information online currently around screen-based eye tracking and facial expression analysis to understand emotional responses to educational content and engagement. And I put up some details there from the company's website where they kind of playfully talk about the quote, smallest, squirmiest of subjects. And again, you can appreciate why there would be a desire to want to research and better understand development and, say, help improve reading comprehension, or look into what's going to be the best media format to capture learners' attentions. But sometimes I think that line begins to feel a bit squirmy between, say, value and opportunity and being a little bit creepy and being overly monitored. But this kind of use won't be limited to education, of course. It's going to be really valuable, I imagine, for toy and game developers and makers of their products. And so I just wanted to focus briefly here on some examples of responses to implementation of biometrics. So a couple of years ago, an Australian school intended to use a biometric system in part to help tackle bathroom vandalism. And from the media reporting, it seems like the school later decided to pause and opted to have greater consultation or some further consultation with school community groups on the options. Last year, the UK Privacy Commissioner issued a reprimand when facial recognition technology began to be used to take cashless payments in a school cafeteria. The problem here was that no privacy impact assessment or kind of no risk analysis or sort of privacy assessments had been done, which is required by the UK privacy law. So there was nothing that looked at how would authorization to collect biometric information be obtained. And the school opted that somewhat, as you would expect, they would look to parental consent or opt-in. But the commissioner said that this could have been obtained from students as they were of an age to provide their own consent. And there was no opportunity given to decide whether or not to use biometric information in this way. And I just note with this instance as well, the school actually had for a number of years prior already been using a fingerprint system in the cafe. and then they changed to facial recognition. So good learning there as well, that you can't just change over systems without looking at privacy afresh. And then I also thought it was worthwhile noting here as well that there's actually in the Office of the Privacy Commissioner's draft guidance on our New Zealand impending biometrics code, there's an illustrative example use case there of facial recognition being used at a school for payment in a cafeteria. And so with it being an example case, it looks at all the considerations that have to be stepped through, including what is necessary and proportionate, potential risks such as misidentification of a child, and how tikanga would be applied. So again, in a similar vein, oh, sorry, just jumped ahead on my slides there. In a similar vein to the sort of, well, why worry? A key point in all of this obviously also is going to be security and understanding where and how biometric information is stored. You know, obviously you can reset your password, but you can't change your fingerprint. And the New Zealand Draft Biometrics Code has the specific requirement to ensure that the information is protected by reasonable security safeguards, and that if it is necessary for the information to be given to someone in connection with the provision of a service, then the organisation does everything reasonably within its power to prevent unauthorised use or disclosure of the information. So security components are going to be things like, say, encryption of biometric data and separate storage from other personal information. And the Commissioner's draft guidance looks at relevant security safeguards generally that include multi-factor authentication to protect the biometric information and putting data into a biometric template. As these templates are digital representations of biometric data. So instead of actually having the raw data itself being stored, the information gets converted into like a swishy mathematical model, and then it's just a numerical representation of, say, a fingerprint. I think some other points that are relevant for schools include risk assessment, and touched upon that a little bit before with that UK example and the impact assessment. Really thinking about risks and assessing these. So you're getting into what are the opportunities, what are the concerns, and what are the benefits. You're thinking about the need to be open and transparent. So really critical and important that there's good consultation with your communities. Both of these points then link into proportionality considerations, which is also specific under the new code from the Commissioner. So you're going to be looking at scope, extent and degree of privacy risk, whether the benefits of what you are wanting to achieve through using biometric data outweigh the privacy risks, and what the cultural considerations and impacts may be. So if we look a little bit around regulation that protects children's privacy in relation to biometrics, just got a couple of instances here for regulation and how things are addressed in law. So there's the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. This is like the big European privacy law. That classifies biometric data, things such as fingerprints, facial recognition, and iris scans, as sensitive personal data that require special protection. And with respect to children, those under the age of 16, and in some EU member states for children under the age of 13, there needs to be parental consent for data processing. Also within GDPR, one of the standards that has to be complied with is the need to ensure that products are age appropriate based on the ages of individual users. And to be able to do that or to meet that, there's a requirement that the age of users is established with the appropriate level of certainty. I think here's a case where, as Annette was talking to before, we might see biometrics being used. So you need to identify age through facial recognition technology. So we end up, I guess, being a little bit circular with that. and very important that the consideration of all the risks that we've been talking about are considered. We also came across the Protection of Freedoms Act in the UK, and that has specific provisions around the use of biometrics in schools, which was good to note. And then here in New Zealand, we have the Privacy Act and then the new draft code from the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. So consultations concluded, and we can expect then to see the code issued at some stage in the not too distant future. There is a lot to cover under the code, so I won't get into it here. I've mentioned a few sections already as we go, but considerations for children certainly come up under rules 1 and 4 when you're thinking about information being collected from children and rangatahi, and again, that assessment of privacy risk. So we wanted to look at what are some considerations of things to look out for when we're talking about biometrics. And so firstly, from a parents or caregivers whānau perspective, we thought a good one to highlight is see what personal information the toy will collect, how that information will be used, whether it will be shared, and how long the information will be retained. With the toy, change default passwords that come with it, use unique passwords, and if you can do it yourself or get someone to help use a little bit tech savvy, then make sure that you've installed any updates available to the toy software. And we can change privacy settings. So the idea being there that you're limiting the amount of personal information provided. Allow the toy to only collect the information necessary for it to properly function. And then with biometric use in schools, again, thinking about what's the exact information that's being collected and why. Is there another way to address the issue or the outcome that you're trying to achieve? Could you provide the same outcome without using biometrics? Asking yourself, who's got access to the system? Who is data shared with? And again, really underscoring here, don't just trust the vendor. You are going to have to do your own due diligence and think through things from an assessment point of view. And so with this last slide here, in terms of things to think about, Annette helpfully came across this and put this together that we thought just added in. It's a good resource, and there are a couple of additional points to note there from a parent or a caregiver perspective. What happens if there is opt-out? And again, a little bit related to those kind of due diligence, thinking things through for yourself. What information or evidence is there that supports claims that the new technology will provide a good outcome or improve operations?
Thanks, Rebecca. So as we begin to conclude our webinar today, we come back to this point about a digital profile. And Rebecca has walked through a number of different technologies, toys, and examples where a lot of information is being collected, and has reiterated the importance of doing a privacy impact assessment, particularly for schools and for parents to actually ask those questions: what information is being collected, how is it being used, and so on. Because increasingly, a child's digital profile is being informed by this information. It's being informed by biometric information, and sometimes we really do not know what this all entails, what is being inferred. So it's important to understand that a child's digital profile is not only built by what they do and by their parents and maybe friends, but by others and by organizations that are collecting and using this information. And it can have lasting consequences. The burden is unfortunately shifting more and more to parents, and the uncomfortable reality is that the responsibility has shifted to parents. In our view, it shouldn't be like this. We feel that a lot of this responsibility actually does need to lie with the vendors and with other parties. So finally, as we conclude, we want to thank you for joining us in this webinar. Much of what children do, um, Tamariki, they play, but a lot of that play is being digitalized and used to create these profiles. So we no longer ask the question, you know, how is biometric shaping children's digital lives? But the statement is biometric is actually shaping children's lives. So thank you very much. We'll take any questions.
Just bringing up the Q&A here. Comment made, interested in examples of sophisticated biometric tools that are likely to be employed in the ed sector in future. For example, reading attentiveness, emotional recognition, or for autism, etc. My question is, these appear to cross over regulatory categories and boundaries, indeed, health purposes versus education, etc. Collation and storage of data is another issue. With the challenges Aotearoa faces in terms of skilled teacher shortages and training needs, who should be ultimately responsible for the deployment and monitoring of such tools? Oh, good question. Good question. It's one that we've had a good kōrero within the working group, isn't it? And yes, and indeed, sort of one of the reasons for the genesis of the children's campaign that the Privacy Foundation looked at earlier was sort of exploring these concerns and considerations around accountability and ultimately responsibility. And I think we sort of are thinking, in part, it has to be shared. It can't just rest with one group or link in the chain, as it were. There's vendor responsibility in terms of that transparency and the information that they can provide in terms of privacy preserving functionality. Obviously, as Annette said, a lot of the burden shifts to parents and schools and teachers. And the foundation noted within our submission on the Children's Privacy Project that we definitely recognize that it takes a lot of time to come up to speed with all of these things. And when you've got a free product that is easy to implement and you think this is going to have some really good gains, we can understand why you just want to proceed. So yeah, and you're right also that it will touch upon not just thinking about it from like an educational best interest of the child space. There will be a health lens to consider, and if any of this, say, bumps up against the Health Information Privacy Code. Don't know if you wanted to add anything there in terms of the accountability.
I'm not going to add anything more to it. It's a very important question because a lot of information, particularly in some of the biometric spaces, and yes, attentiveness, emotions, and so on. And it doesn't even have to be for autism. I mean, on the one hand, we see a lot of these tools being able to improve learning, and what parent would not want to be able to take advantage of all opportunities there are to help their child do the best that they can. But these come with these issues. And yes, they do cross over these regulatory boundaries. And I'm not sure what the answer is, but maybe we do have to have something that says, well, if you are collecting information that is, in fact, health information, even though you're not a health provider, then I do think that those institutions need to be somewhat subject to be responsible for how that information is being handled. I was just having a look at a privacy policy for an organization. I'm not going to say who at this point, but one that is being used for within schools. And well, first of all, I couldn't find the privacy policy. The link is actually broken. So I then found a policy for the parent company, which is in the USA, and this information, which is very sensitive information, can be used in so many different ways. So I do feel very strongly that there needs to be more than guardrails around the handling of information. And by the time these children grow up, they're going to have bigger dossiers than we can ever imagine. So thanks very much for the question. And yes, there's a follow-on question was, does it raise issues under the Human Rights Act? I think it does. We can ask, I mean, do children still have a right to grow up without being scrutinized so much? And I think that they do. Yeah, I think there is, oh, there's a couple questions here. Would having a human in the loop to review the attentiveness score mitigate the risks of unfair processing? So this was around attentiveness. Um, I guess I'm not quite sure how to answer that particular question. But yes, perhaps it could mitigate the risks, particularly when you are, I think where it really comes in is when decisions are being made. What we're not clear on is to what extent, once you start processing these vast amounts of information that are shared with other organizations, where does it stop? And that's a big question that we don't have an answer to.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly in the AI space, when you're thinking about ethical use and sort of guardrails in that, there's often, and you're thinking about accuracy, there's often that mantra of human, AI, human, you need to have the human in the loop.
Mhm. So we have another question here. Given the responsibility that is, for better or worse, placed on individuals, do you have any thoughts on how to start talking to children about privacy matters? Do we rely on parents or need government intervention, for example, schools teaching how to consume and share information safely? I am going to put a plug in here for what the OPC is doing, that they are working on some resources which we expect to see very soon that are aimed at helping, that can be used in schools. They're aimed at children, at parents, and so on. Resources that can help them to understand privacy matters better. So I'm going to put in a plug for that. We can't just rely on parents and others just finding it out. It's a very difficult space to navigate, and we need to do the best that we can to equip people. What practical steps can parents take to support children when they interact with these technologies? Um, there are many things to do. Yes.
One that stands out, and yet was one that you spoke about earlier, with that sort of, where is the line on the personification of this? And yes, you've got like a learning buddy or something with the technology, but it is still just a thing.
So I also think that parents, particularly as technologies become more intelligent, I think this is where we need for parents to be able to support their children, particularly how they interact with AI-driven toys, tools, learning software, whatever it is, because these are very much, they're no longer passive. They are shaping how children develop. They're shaping how their thoughts develop. They're shaping their perceptions of the world. And in fact, some of these tools are not recommended for very young children. For example, augmented reality VR headsets and so on are not recommended for young children because of how they can, because of the impact they can have on a child's development. There's recent research that is even talking about a type of autism that is coming up because children spend too much time on screens. So these are some of the things that it's a world that is changing. It is changing very, very rapidly. And there are steps. Yes, parents need to be aware, but there's also that part that says that we need to have organizations that can help to educate. I'm sure most people don't have the the resources to go out there and do all the research, but we need to have resources for parents to navigate this new world. Um, and then the last question is when is a child mature enough to take control of their own digital profile? We mentioned 13 years in the UK. So those age guidelines are really around the definition of a child when we look at some of these legislations. But when we think of maturity, we really need to think age and stage of maturity. So, for example, you may have a younger child who is very mature and able to take charge of their digital profile. You may have someone who's older who is not adept yet at taking charge. So I would say we'd have to consider the maturity of the child and not just the age. Um, I did see something that said a handout, but I think we can't do handouts. So it would need to be something
Straight.
that's in
Yeah,
the chat.
yeah, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A.
Okay, well, thank you so very much. Any final words you'd like to add, Rebecca?
No, I would say thank you to everyone for joining today. Please reach out to us at the Privacy Foundation. As Annette said earlier, in that advocacy space, there's the consultations that we may be involved in. We put out thought pieces. We love to hear from members of the public around particular issues or concerns or thoughts that they may have. So yeah, please reach out, and also feel free to join.
Yes, thank you again very much. And we've also we have a couple of talks that we've done in some of the previous years around specifically focusing on toys or educational technology. So please feel free to have a look at some of those resources. And again, thank you to the privacy to the OPC for giving us the opportunity to once again talk about a topic that is very important to us, very close to our heart. And we thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you for attending.
Thank you.